Geometry Dash is a game that provides a really unique experience when compared to other platformers or rhythm games. Not only can you make custom maps, but alongside using custom songs and having one of the most intricate editors in any game ever, we've seen sequels, remakes, and reimaginations of well-loved projects come to fruition in many different ways. So much, in fact, that it's more or less expected for projects that are successful to eventually get an unofficial or official sequel or remake at some point. But how do you make a proper sequel? Well, that's what we're going to explore today. I've been a part of various continuations in my time, whether they be remakes, sequels, or remasters, and I think they could be so much better just given some small tweaks. So let's get into it. So we're going to split this up into two parts. Firstly, we'll talk about how to make a good sequel, and I'll give some examples and even make one with you guys here. After, we'll have an overview of some popular sequel levels where we'll analyze from as much of an objective standpoint as possible to determine whether or not they are in fact good or faithful installments. So let's begin with what makes for a good sequel. So what is a sequel? Well, according to Google, who I will treat as the messiah, a sequel is a publishment, broadcast, or recorded work that continues the story or develops the same theme of an earlier one. Which makes sense. That makes levels like Deimos, Bloodbath, Atomic Cannon Mark II, POW, Ultraviolence, all valid sequels. Which, yeah, I bet you didn't even know Ultraviolence was a sequel, but we'll get to that later. Okay, so fair enough, we know what a sequel is. Continuing from this point can be quite difficult because the ideas of sequels are quite diverse, and especially if you're trying to do it right, can be really confusing. So let's go through the steps of making our own sequel. I'll take you through the process of how you could go about it, and then we'll look at some not so good examples and where they went wrong. I do want to clarify that what we are about to do isn't the only way to make a sequel. There are various ways, so I just want you guys to take what you find important from this video, and the rest can just be entertainment you remember fondly. I hope. Okay, so now is the part where we get to choose a level to make a sequel to. Ooh, okay. I think that I'm gonna go with Proto Flicker. It's a project that I was a part of last year, which I honestly think went really well for us. This should be so much fun, so let's get right into it. So, our first step, let's go talk to the host. A massive misstep that 99% of creators have when making these continuations is that they don't consult with the host or the original creator on what the original was even supposed to be like. You've got to remember that you most likely did not make the original. So I highly recommend that if you're able to go and talk to the original creator or creators. It will help a ton. If you're not able to, then at the very least try and take a deeper look into the level. Once that's finished though, we can start drafting what the sequel will do to be different than the first. To begin, let's talk about the song. Proto Flicker is honestly a really interesting song to bounce off of because the original only uses like 20% of the actual full song. So to continue from that, we could just use some other sections of the song and stitch those together, which obviously would be a pretty one-for-one expectation in a sequel. However, after talking to the original host, he actually suggested that we use the DJ Norican remix of Ripples, which genuinely is an awesome choice. Here, listen for a few seconds. So we have some good choices already. If I'm honest, I think that the remix would fit a bit better, as not only does it have the same vibe, which is definitely the most important part here, but it also allows for some more active representation that we can use to develop from the original and make something a little more hype. So cool, we have our song. Next, we have our theme and style. Truthfully, I think the style for Proto Flicker is so interesting on its own. This clean, dreamy, technological feel is something I definitely think we can continue doing. But I do think we can make some changes that'll spice up the project. For sequels like this, we're going to focus more on developing a more complex and refreshing theme over the first. Alternatively, you can make sequels that are more story-focused. You can build a world with different locations, tell a tale over multiple levels, or create a theme or gimmick that gets contrasted, challenged, or subverted over each level. But yes, anyway, let's think of some changes. Firstly, we can talk about the color scheme. Something really fun I think that we could do is make the colors more based around oranges and purples that we see in my part as well as the end of the project. It could be a nice way to say, hey, we alluded to this part in the first project and here's how we embrace it. We will still have sections with that full blue vibe from the original, but generally we're looking for some warmer tones and shades. Alternatively, we could do some more subtle changes, which is what the host Elb suggested, switching the original accent color from yellow to something like green or orange. We can also rely a bit more heavily on this ritualistic design that most of the creators opted to do in the original. I think that, alongside the more intense effects because of the song, would be a great way to tie it in with Proto Flicker while not forcing the creators into something that's too specific. Now we're on to difficulty. There's this really interesting stigma on sequels I see where each level after the original has to be so much harder than the last, and I honestly don't agree with that. I think for levels that sole purpose of existing is that it's really hard should probably follow that, where the center point of it is the fact that it's a very difficult level that, still looks really good, but it's meant to be like a top 150 or something. But, for most levels, I don't think it really needs to be present. The difficulty for Proto Flicker was around mid-tier Extreme Demon, a fun level to just beat for top players, and a good challenge for pretty much everyone else. So I think we should stick with that difficulty range. There's no need to push this into the top 150 or anything ridiculous, so let's just leave this so that everyone can enjoy the project. So now we've laid out the grounds for pretty much everything broadly that would be in our sequel for Proto Flicker. A medium tier Extreme Demon using the DJ Norikin remix of Ripples, an orange, yellow, and blue color scheme with ritualistic designs and details and heavy effects. So our last steps is to figure out a name in our dream roster. So let's do that and we will be done. For our name, we really have two routes here. We can either go off of the Proto Flicker name and change something about it to shake things up, like blank flicker or something like that. Or we can call the level Ripples, as Proto Flicker is literally just the name of the song used in the level. So we could follow that theme. Personally, I do think that Ripples would fit a bit more, but it isn't really the greatest name for a level, and I also want it to be pretty clear to viewers that this is related to Proto Flicker in some way. I don't think that's completely necessary to do in your sequels, by the way. I'm just hey, I'm a businessman. What can I say? So with that being said, the name I think I'm gonna land on is Neo Flicker. It has a pretty clean look, while also clearly being related to Proto Flicker to not be a question to everyone whether or not it's a sequel. The only issue with this is that there is another level using this name. A sort of reimagination of Proto Flicker made by -X and others. However, for the sake of example, I'm not gonna lie, I'm just gonna act like that level doesn't exist. They chose the perfect name, but if this is going to be official, I like that we get priority dibs on all of the name choosing, so ha. But on a serious note, obviously no shade to their level or the host or anything like that. This level is just a hypothetical and theirs is very real, so I would 100% go check it out if you guys would like to. It's looking really neat so far. But yes, for this example, Neo Flicker. Business has officially started. Speaking of business, this is going to be a banger roster. So I've made out this list. We've got Para, Boop, Jenkins, Scrumpy, Ewup, CD Pre, Nazgub, Liriaki, Deadlocks, and myself. Most of this roster is from Proto Flicker, as I'm pretty sure they'd all do a pretty good job at this new theme, and obviously their styles would help make this feel similar enough to the original. However, we do have some new faces, being Nazgub, Liriaki, and Deadlocks. I made that choice because I think to really help this project elevate itself above Proto Flicker, we do need some level of freshness to help this stand out. Also, let's be honest, these three creators are just extremely talented, and Nazgub especially, I think could provide a really creative approach to the theme. Although I have no faith that I would be able to grab these people, but hey, that's the benefit of doing this as an example for a video. I can say whatever I want. But yeah, anyway, that's it. So we've made our sequel. Obviously, there is no telling how this would actually turn out, but I do have a lot of faith that it would turn out well given some time and proper planning. But I also do want to be transparent with you guys that the way that I explained this level in the video isn't really the most in-depth. So I would really suggest that if you're going to go with a sequel that has this sort of thematic consistency to elevate it above the original, that you look across the internet and find different reference images and media to differentiate it from the original, so that you're not pulling directly from the same source and you can really get something that's new and fresh. I do also want to make it clear that this is not the only approach to making a sequel that would have resulted in a good product. There are a multitude of different ways that you could go about it. All I want is for you guys to take in mind some of the tips that I gave throughout when making your own sequels. So now let's get controversial. Let's talk about some popular sequels we've seen over the years and discuss whether they are good sequels to the original material or not. Obviously, I am open to disagreements here, but I will only be observing and judging them based on the criteria that I laid out previously. So let's get into our first project. Atomic Cannon Mark II by Leeb. Atomic Cannon is honestly such a cool level on its own, seemingly paying homage to a lot of older design level aesthetics while having a really refreshing but familiar take on it in Leeb's style. From the song to the gameplay itself, this level to me resembles how I imagine a lot of iconic 1.9 levels to feel in my head after all these years. So how does he take Atomic Cannon and build upon it? Well, I actually asked Leeb himself so we can see. He said, and I quote, "Before making a sequel, I wanted to make sure that I was reflecting the original level well. Many sequels just completely forget about what the original level established, so I pinpointed key elements that could stay consistent between the two. For instance, the very first click in both levels require you to be holding from frame 0 and execute an orb timing. This establishes consistency between the levels right from the start, and the next two levels will have the same type of click. I added more colors to parts, expanded on the rainbow designs, and kept a similar gameplay structure and constantly threw in references to the original." Now, this obviously isn't a rigid structure that you have to stick by for your sequels like I've explained earlier, but this level of forethought and consideration makes the level feel so much more correlated and continuous, even in the smallest details. You can see pretty clearly in the designs how he took key elements from the original and elevated them in new and fresh ways, while also introducing completely new ideas such as the black and white transitions and the iconic wave spam. It all feels familiar enough in terms of structure, but is still doing its own thing. Additionally, to get this out of the way, Atomic Cannon is inspired by Intercept by Viperin. It pays a lot of homage to that level's ideas and obviously uses the same song. So for the sequel, he chose to be inspired by Robotic Nightmares by Viperin, which is what I thought. Honestly, it was silly of me for just assuming, but you can see why Anyway, so he got inspired by Metallic Torment by Mindsap in Viperin. This was to keep the base idea of the series the same while pulling from a completely different source to keep things fresh. On top of this, he drew a good amount of inspiration from Giron in his Plasma Pulse series, even going as far as having him make some of the gameplay for Mark II. Both of these elements add up to create a much more chaotic feel to the level overall, again adding to this identity he mentioned prior that he continuously built on throughout the level. Overall, Atomic Cannon Mark II was a beautifully executed sequel to the original, whether you personally like it more or not. An issue that I see fairly often in the Geometry Dash community and in social media in general is that something isn't good if you don't personally enjoy it. That, for example, Mark II isn't a good sequel because you personally don't like the song or maybe some of the design choices. It's a completely unfair assessment when there are so many more analytical and nuanced conversations to be had about the components that make up this project. For that reason, I'd like to now talk about a level that is pretty unanimously loved by the community, but is actually the culprit for various major mistakes in making a sequel. So let's talk about it. Ultraviolence by Zendergame. So first things first, this is actually my favorite level ever, of all time. Also, Zender is a pretty cool guy, and I've talked to him and worked closely with him several times. So I don't want to hear anyone trying to say that I'm biased against this level or anything. It could not be any further from the truth. As a standalone level, this project does almost everything right for me. However, as a sequel, Zender left so much to be desired, and so that's what we'll get into today. For starters, not many people even know that Ultraviolence is a sequel, which I think on its own is a testament to how little thought actually went into the theming and analyzation between the two projects. So what is the original level in this series? Well, that would go to a level made over 4 years ago now, called Field of Memories by the Zender man himself. I know this solely because when Ultraviolence was in production, Zender posted a teaser video. In the video, it showed some footage of the level still in progress, and at the end showed that Ultraviolence was a part of a 3-level series. The first being Field of Memories, the second being Ultraviolence, and the third being Absolute Magnitude. However, that's no longer the case, as you'll soon see. But let's talk about the 2 levels we did get in the series. Field of Memories. It was actually a pretty neat level for the time, featuring very deserted, maybe even dystopian aesthetics, some castle themes, and ending off on what I believe is a factory, but it's kind of unclear to me. Now, Ultraviolence. Ultraviolence builds a very fantastical world with factories, cities, and life pretty much everywhere you go. Eventually, you run into these machines built in the lore by Zender Tech, which continue to chase you down until the last boss, called Abomination, inevitably eats you. So what actually connects these 2 levels together, you might ask? Well, once again, I went back to the source and consulted Zender Game. The way he explained it, there are actually no major connections between the levels. They're more so just related through idea and advertising. In actuality, the level has more to do with the Eschaton than it does Field of Memories. As you can see throughout, there are references to the different boss fights in that level. So what could he have done better? Where they could have been leaked the most is definitely from a structure perspective. Because if I'm honest, conceptually the projects aren't actually that different. I think if the beginning of Field of Memories was left either open-ended or alluded to how UV started, that already could have been a good tie-in. And what you all should be identifying, and what I've described a couple times now, this is where sequels can differ from levels like Atomic Cannon Mark II. Sequels that continue a story or world traversal don't have to look or reference the original really at all if the story is tight enough. An idea to throw around is that Field of Memories could have been a place that was empty and deserted, a literal physical place where you can explore the character's own personal memories. It ends in this factory that is the first example of real inspiration going on inside your memories, leading you to believe that there's more to be explored. That this factory/castle place means something to you, as it's the only major thing that you could see. Ultraviolence then dives deeper into this idea by showing you why this place is prominent to you. Shows you cities, the factory, the technology, a lab inside of the factory, all trying to kill you until at the end, you die. This allows the series to be left on some sort of cliffhanger, to which you can then recontextualize entirely in the final level, Absolute Magnitude. There are definitely some things that can be tweaked and changed about that idea. I literally wrote that down for the video as I came up with it in my head, but just that level of connection between the projects was pretty straightforward. And you wouldn't even need to change much about how the levels currently look either, outside of including some visual storytelling and environmental consistency between them. I could honestly go on and on about different sequels in GD and how flawed or well done they are when put under the criteria laid out by other art forms and media. Honestly, I don't even think that I touched on everything that I could with what makes for good sequels. That's just how vast art can be. Funnily enough, on top of all of this, we didn't even touch on remakes or remasters and the pros and cons within those types of projects. It's such a broad concept. So yeah, comment down below if you would like to see videos on either of those. I would absolutely love to get those out for you guys. Sequels in Geometry Dash have to be one of the most popular but misunderstood parts of the game. And so I hope this video helped you out in some way. If you think there's more to say about sequels or even disagree about some of the points that I made, then please, I invite you to comment down below so we can chat and converse. That's honestly one of my favorite parts about making these videos. And admittedly, with 2.2 coming around, I think the scope for how we can make these sequels and level series overall can and will change drastically. as visual storytelling is going to be a lot different then. Like with platformer mode, the ability to stand still while you take in certain scenery, dialogue, and situations in general will be monumental in making more natural progressing story arcs and, by association, sequels. But that's for future us to worry about. Maybe once we're like a few months deep into 2.2, I can make an updated video on this that's more suited for the projects people are making them. But for now, I hope you guys all had as good of a time watching this as I did making it. I also want to give a huge shout out to Edward Believe and Zinder for helping me out in understanding their projects fully. I 100% could not have made this video without them. Honestly, after all these years playing GD, it surprises me every day that I still have so much passion for our little cube game. But hey, I think there's a sign there that we have something special here. So I'll continue to work on this channel and help build up the GD community in a healthy way for as long as I possibly can. But for now, I've got to go. I need to go fight crime and save the world by also being borderline homeless because I'm Spider-Man.
I got the shivers whenever I'm thinking about you.